When people hear the President of the United States talk, when they see him tweet, when they observe how he acts, the question comes up from time to time, is there something a little bit unusual about the mental landscape of this individual, so to speak? And someone who has addressed that question, not only with the current occupant of the Oval Office, but with previous occupants as well, is Dr. Justin Frank. He is a New York Times best-selling author and clinical professor of psychiatry at George Washington University. He was the author of Bush on the Couch, and the new book that he has out is Trump on the Couch. Dr. Frank, welcome to Now It's the News. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, thanks. Let's start out in the stereotypical way we see therapy sessions depicted on TV. Tell us about Trump's mom. Tell us about his mother.
Well, he nearly lost her when he was 2 because she almost died following the birth of his youngest brother, Robert.
Oh, wow.
She was hospitalized when he was 2. She had a massive hemorrhage. She had 4 surgeries in the hospital. So he really lacked a kind of powerful maternal force. She was never quite the same afterwards. He never had a powerful maternal force that really did have a deep effect on his character. So he felt betrayed, even though she was not her fault that she got so sick.
I hadn't been aware of that incident.
Yes.
Was she just kind of removed from day-to-day care from that point on? Or?
Yeah, well, the 2 things. One is she was removed to some extent from day-to-day care because of being weak. She also had some housekeepers to help. And the other thing was that she was self-removed when he was a little older because she was so interested in the trappings of money. In the trappings of what she had, because she grew up very poor in Scotland, and she married this business tycoon who was making all kinds of money.
Right.
And right when Donald was born in 1946, they moved into this palatial house that they built, that the father built, and that was built like a real, it was a mansion. I don't know what else to say. Or a palace. And so she always was fascinated with the royal family. She was fascinated with wealth and gold. And when by the time Donald was 5 or 6, she would have a chauffeur in a pink Rolls Royce drive her around the Bronx and collect rent from the various tenants. She would sit in the back like a real queen. So she was very much the kind of person who was looking at herself in the mirror and was a narcissistic kind of person. So I don't think he got a lot of warmth from her. When he became president, for instance, for the first 4 months, there was only a picture of his father on his desk. There was never a picture of her on his desk for the first 4 months of his presidency, and it seemed like it was like an omission, and I think it was an omission because he never thought much about her.
Interesting.
Whenever he was asked to describe her, he would just say she was great, she was wonderful, but never any actual qualities or characteristics of hers. So I think that it led to a lack of empathy on his part, his ability to mock other people and make fun of them, because rather than if you feel betrayed when you're that little, you either are always afraid that somebody else is going to abandon you, or you become a betrayer yourself.
Interesting.
And I think that's what he did.
Interesting, you comparing him with Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill's parents were also very distant. It's a very different situation, but he turned out very differently, didn't he?
Yes, he did. And in fact, that was one of the papers that Freud wrote towards the end of his life, but he wrote this little paper called The Fate of a Neurosis. And in that paper, he said that we can't predict from the person's childhood how they're going to become. Right. And I think that's true. The Churchill had look at all the people who survived the Holocaust, the ones who lived through it. They're very different from each other. And I think that Churchill had a similar background to Trump. The difference was that his wiring was a little different. Trump was unable to read. Churchill could read. He was unable to make sense of ideas, and because of his dyslexia, he had trouble processing what he heard. Churchill could process what he heard and make sense of it and think about it. Churchill got depressed and had a serious depression. When you have a depression like that, you're able to actually think about yourself and your own losses, what you yearn for. But when you're like Trump, you never have a depression. As soon as he was anxious, he would expel anxiety, get rid of it, because he was a hyperactive child. So he would hit, throw things, get in fights at school as a way of managing anxiety. So it was very different. He also didn't drink, and Churchill was a big drinker, which was another way to manage anxiety. Trump actually didn't drink, but he got rid of his anxiety very quickly by making other people feel anxious. He would come into a room and try to make other people anxious so he didn't have to feel it. And then he gets us to feel anxious and worried about his safety, what kind of a president he is, how can he control himself.
Do you think that, and I understand the reason behind his not drinking, because he had an older brother, he abused alcohol, and I understand why he doesn't. Do you think that maybe from time to time, if he took a drink, he might do a little bit better in terms of his interactions with other people?
I do. I'd love to give him just have a highball with him from time to time. I think it would be good. His father also didn't drink.
Yeah.
And his father didn't drink largely because his father, Donald's grandfather, was a very heavy drinker and a big drunk. So the father decided not to drink, and then he got Donald not to drink, although the older brother, Fred, did drink. One of the things that fathers and sons sometimes live out is they live out unresolved conflicts with their firstborn that they had with their father. So if he has a problem about his father's drinking, it's no accident that his son became an alcoholic in that sense. It's like reliving something from his past.
We're speaking with Dr. Justin Frank. He is the author of Trump on the Couch. Let's talk a little bit more about Donald Trump's father.
Sure.
You mentioned that he had a picture of his father on his desk for the first few months of his presidency, not his mom. What was his relationship with his father like growing up?
Well, his father was a tyrant at home. He was very demanding, and he never praised his children. However, Donald saw him attack and criticize the firstborn, his older brother, Fred Jr., and he was a very observant person, Donald, and he understood that the only way to deal with his father would be to go along with what he did, try to be like him. It's called identification with the aggressor. It means, if the father hits the kid hits the dog. It's like being like him so you won't be hit by him. So he became like his father, and he became ruthless like his father, demanding like his father. The other thing his father did was his father cut corners in building and tried to always save money and was always talking about being taken advantage of. He would count every little nail, and he would go to the construction sites and save every little nail that was on the ground. And Donald is like that. I mean, he keeps talking about how expensive it is to have military exercises in South Korea. He talks about money a lot, and he wants to not spend money, and he cuts back on spending.
Gotcha.
And so in that sense, he's very much like his father. He's also rivalrous with his father because he's afraid of him. His father was really tough and really critical. So he used to even say, he even wrote at one point, I went and saw this piece of property, and I decided I was not going to tell my father about it. I was scared to buy it without telling him, but I decided to do it. I mean, he's like, this is an adult man. He was probably in his 40s when he was like that. He's really scared of his father. So he needed to feel omniscient, omnipotent as a way of protecting himself from his father. So he developed an ideal sense of who he was in relation to his father, so he could be reassured that he was powerful and strong, but never had to feel consciously that he needed his father. So he attacked regulations. He attacks what other people do when they try to. He hates regulations on business because his father tried to regulate his life. So he hates all regulations. He also was sneaky with his father. He snuck into Manhattan and he lied to his father, and he bought switchblade knives and started a collection of switchblades, which his father found out, and his father sent him away to a military training academy.
Wow.
And his father was the one person who understood him, and his father sent him away because he knew he couldn't cope with Donald, and he wanted to stop his behavior because he was throwing things at kids at school. He was in detention every day almost. He couldn't pay attention and couldn't learn.
Wow.
So his father set limits and figured it out. I think unconsciously now, even though Donald is now over 70, I think unconsciously he still has a remnant of that fear of being discovered. So he has to, and I think that he's living that out in relation to Mueller's investigation, that Mueller is going to be like his father in some way and figure out who he is. And instead of sending him out of the Queens and his home, he's going to send him out of the Oval Office.
Right. We're speaking with Dr. Justin Frank, the author of Trump on the Couch. One thing more briefly about his father, I suppose really more of a medical question as opposed to a psychiatric one, but his father, late in life, had Alzheimer's disease and passed away as a result. Many people have speculated that this could be a family trait, especially given what they observe to be the president's mental lapses. What are your observations about that?
Well, I'm not ready. I think he needs to have an evaluation, a proper one, not by Dr. Ronnie Jackson, and who can say, well, he can draw a camel or whatever he did, draw a clock. I think that he needs that. I think that he's not nearly as coherent as he was, say, 10 or 15 years ago, but who is once they're over 65? I mean, It's very unusual. So, including me, and so I don't feel that there's enough evidence yet, but there is the fact that Alzheimer's often runs in families. There are tests for it. I think that some of the characteristics of people with early Alzheimer's he does have, which is the repetition of words and phrases, trying to get through to people and make himself understood, his inability to really process questions, and return to familiar pat phrases and things that he's more comfortable saying.
Right. And let's address that some also, separate from whatever medical cause there might be of that. Let's talk about his communication style. Why do you think Donald Trump speaks in this roundabout, stream of consciousness, discursive way? Has he just spent too much time with Sarah Palin, or is there something deeper to it?
Well, I think there's something deeper to it, although he probably has a little bit of Sarah Palin in his genes. But I think that the main issue for him is that because he lies to himself, because he attacks inner truth, because he avoids facing who he is and taking responsibility, over time, he's less and less able to think clearly. He's less and less able to make sense. What I write in my book, that's a very simple statement, it's very clear, that the search for truth is to the mind or the psyche like food is to the body. And without that search, the psyche starves. And I think that's what's happening to him. I don't think he can think clearly. I think he reacts instead of thinking. I think he shouts louder than other people and interrupts other people, and that's how he is. I think that part of that is not only an attack on truth, it's an attack on inner truth to protect himself from any kind of pain, any kind of yearning, any kind of thing that interferes with a fundamental fantasy that I think he has, and that is that he's completely self-reliant. He doesn't need anybody else. He's his own best supervisor. He's his own best foreign policy man. He's his own focus group.
It's interesting to think about how closely that dovetails with the American ideal of individualism, that you've pulled yourself up by your own bootstraps, that you can do it on your own, that you don't need any outside help. When it comes down to the nuts and bolts of it, we all